Adama lost everything because of a lie. The man she loved turned away, and the world watched her fall. But the truth was coming, and with it, justice. The streets of New York City buzzed with noise. A beggar's voice got lost in the honking of cars. Women called out prices as wooden stalls creaked under fresh fruits. A man in a fancy suit, holding a shiny briefcase, carefully stepped over a puddle while a vendor splashed water on his vegetables. Among the crowd, Adama stood at her yam stall, wiping sweat from her forehead. Her voice was strong, sweet roasted, yams fresh and hot. She waved a piece in the air, hoping to catch a hungry eye. A small girl tugged at her mother's wrapper. "Mama, I'm hungry." "Hush," the woman said, her eyes scanning the wealthy customers who never stopped. Across the city, in a towering penthouse, Kweku Mensah adjusted the cuffs of his embroidered agbada. His assistant stood beside him, flipping through schedules. "Your meeting with the investors is at noon. The governor's dinner is at 8, the assistant listed. Kweku only nodded. His life was precise, controlled, expected. Yet as he stared out at the city beneath him, something inside him felt hollow. The day was just beginning, and already he longed for it to end. The heat pressed heavily as Kweku's luxury car rolled to a stop near the market. His driver muttered under his breath, stepping out to inspect the problem. Kweku remained inside, fingers drumming against his knee. He glanced outside. Crowds of people, voices rising, sweat glistening on their faces. The smell of roasting yams drifted in, unfamiliar, yet strangely inviting. At her stall, Adama turned a yam with steady hands. A woman in silk stopped nearby, nose wrinkling. "How can people eat this filth?" she scoffed, her voice dripping with disgust. A coin clinked to the ground. "Buy something decent." Silence rippled through the crowd. Adama held the woman's gaze but said nothing. She had learned long ago, dignity was not in the words spoken but in the silence kept. The woman walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement. A tug at her skirt made Adama look down. A small girl, barefoot, eyes wide with hunger, Adama didn't hesitate. She split her last yam in half and placed it in the child's hands. "Eat, little one." From his car, Kweku watched. For the first time in a long while, something inside him shifted. Kweku sat on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. The girl with the roasted yams haunted his thoughts. She had nothing, yet she carried herself with a quiet strength he had never seen before. Her defiant eyes, her calm voice, why did she linger in his mind? He turned over, closed his eyes, and tried to shut her out. But the luxury around him felt empty. His empire, his wealth, none of it had ever given him the peace this street vendor seemed to possess. For the first time in years, Kweku felt restless, searching for something he couldn't name. The next morning, without understanding why, he ordered his driver to take him back to the market. When he stepped out of his sleek car, the market froze. People whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. What business did a billionaire have in their world of dust and struggle? Adama wiped her hands on her dress, watching him approach. His agbada was spotless, his shoes untouched by dirt. He did not belong. "Here, I'll buy everything," Kweku said, his voice firm. Adama folded her arms. "I sell to feed myself, not to beg." The crowd held its breath. No one spoke to a rich man like that. But Kweku did not get angry. Instead, he pulled out a bundle of cash and placed it on her stall. "Keep the change," he said, and walked away. Adama stared at the money, her chest tight with anger. Did he think he could throw his wealth at her like she was a problem to be solved? Yet as the wind brushed against her face, another thought crept in. Was this a blessing or an insult? By nightfall, the market was alive with whispers. "Shiai, Must be special if a man like that is chasing her. Maybe she's not just selling yams. Envy turned sharp, and soon the murmurs turned into cruel accusations. She thinks she's better than us now. Adama kept her head high, but the words clung to her like dust. Days later, trouble arrived. Uniformed officers stormed the market, their voices loud and unforgiving. Illegal vending, clear the area. Chaos erupted. Stalls were overturned. Goods trampled underfoot. Adama's heart pounded as she grabbed her yams, but before she could save them, a heavy boot smashed her last basket. A vendor grabbed her wrist. This is not about the law. The big traders in the city don't want us here. Someone paid for this. Adama stood frozen as her livelihood was reduced to splinters. That night, with nowhere to go, she curled up on a cold sidewalk. Hunger gnawed at her, but worse was the humiliation. She had worked hard, yet with one cruel act, everything was taken. A car slowed nearby. Kweku, inside, watched her small figure on the concrete. Something in his chest tightened. He stepped out and walked towards her. "Come with me," he said softly. Adama sat up. "I do not take pity." Kweku sighed, then knelt beside her. "Then let me offer something else." She looked at him, waiting. "I don't believe in handouts, but I believe in business. Supply food for my company's cafeteria. If your yams are as good as you claim, prove it." Adama studied him. This was not charity. This was a challenge. After a long pause, she nodded, and just like that, the game changed. But the city's elite did not miss the news. At lavish parties, glasses clinked as women whispered, "Have you heard? Kweku Mensah has taken an interest in a market girl." Businessmen smirked over drinks. What does he really want from her? Kweku ignored them all. For the first time in his life, he was focused on something that had nothing to do with wealth. Adama sat in silence, her hands brushing against the worn fabric of her dress. Though Kweku had given her a chance to rebuild, her life, an invisible wall, remained between them. He was kind, patient, but something held her back. Trust was not an easy thing to give when life had taught her that kindness often came with a price. Yet, in the quiet moments, she allowed herself to dream. A small restaurant, the scent of slow-cooked spices, customers laughing over warm meals, her own place built with her hands. She had never dared to imagine such a thing before. But now, with Kweku's help, it almost seemed possible. "Adama," Kweku's voice was gentle, "you've done well. The contract with my company is just the start. You can have more if you want it." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I want it," she admitted, "but I need to earn it myself." Kweku smiled. "That's why I admire you." But in the shadows, someone else was watching. Kwame, a businessman known for his ruthless ways, had been following their story. His lips curled into a smirk. A street vendor, catching the eye of a billionaire. That was an opportunity he couldn't ignore. At a gathering of the city's elite, Kwame leaned in close to the powerful men and women sipping their wine. "A clever woman, that Adama," he said smoothly. "She knows exactly what she's doing. First, she sells yams on the roadside. Now, she sells dreams to Kweku. A true gold digger, don't you think?" The whispers spread like fire. Soon, the newspapers had their own version of the story. Billionaire Kweku, a Moa falls for street vendor, true love or cunning scheme. The headlines screamed scandal. Photos of Adama and Kweku filled the front pages. In the markets, women clucked their tongues. In the grand halls of the wealthy, men shook their heads. Kweku's phone buzzed endlessly with calls. His mother's voice was cold when he answered. "You are embarrassing our family," she said sharply. "Love does not build empires, Kweku. You know this." His father's words were even harsher. "A woman from the streets will never be one of us. If you do not end this, you will lose everything." Kweku clenched his jaw. He had never cared for their rules. But could he truly throw away his entire legacy for one woman? Adama, unaware of the storm brewing, continued her work. But something had changed. When she walked through the market, eyes followed her with suspicion. The merchants who once greeted her with smiles now whispered behind her back. One evening Kweku arrived, but his usual warmth was gone. Maybe we should take a step back," he said, avoiding her gaze. Adama frowned. "What are you saying?" "There's too much pressure. The business, my family, the media. It's complicated." Her heart twisted. She had not asked for any of this, yet now she was paying the price. "So you're ashamed of me?" she asked quietly. Kweku did not answer. His silence spoke louder than words. That night, Adama sat alone, staring at the empty road ahead. She had once believed in new beginnings. Now she wasn't so sure, but fate was not done with her yet. The next day, chaos erupted in the marketplace. Uniformed men stormed in, their voices sharp with authority. "Illegal business!" they shouted. "You are under arrest!" Before she could react, rough hands grabbed her, pulling her away. The other vendors watched but did nothing. Fear held them in place. As she was dragged through the dirt, her mind spun. Who had done this? Why? And where was Kweku? The cold bars of the prison cell pressed against her back. The room smelled of damp earth and old sorrow. A frail voice beside her broke the silence. "You are Adama, daughter of Mensa, aren't you?" Adama turned. An old woman, her face lined with years of wisdom, studied her carefully. "How do you know?" "My father?" Adama asked. The woman's eyes darkened. "Because once, long ago, he was a powerful man. He stood side by side with Kweku's family, but greed and betrayal destroyed him." Adama's breath caught. "The past has not been forgotten," the old woman continued, "and now history is repeating itself." Adama clenched her fists. Was this fate? Or was it time to change the story? Kweku sat in silence, the weight of the truth pressing against his chest. He had been blind, fooled by whispers, led by fear. The world had turned against Adama, but now the veil had lifted. He traced back the lies, the betrayal that had stolen her family's honor. Adama was not a fraud. Her father had been a man of integrity, his legacy buried by men who once stood beside Kweku's own father. And those men, they still sat in power, still reaping the rewards of their deception, but not for long. Kweku clenched his fists. He would not stand by. He had seen the pain in Adama's eyes, the injustice that bound her. No more. He moved swiftly, seeking out the truth, gathering proof. The papers, the records, everything pointed to one thing: corruption. With each step, the puzzle came together, revealing the rot at the core of his father's old allies. When he had all he needed, Kweku stood before the village elders. His voice did not waver. "These men stole from Adama's family. They turned a great man into nothing, took his wealth, his honor, and left his daughter to suffer." He threw the proof at their feet. "It ends today," the elders murmured, faces darkening. The accused men shifted, eyes darting in fear. One of them stepped forward, his voice slick with false confidence. "These are lies. A woman like her. Do not speak her name," Kweku thundered. "You have hidden behind power for too long." The weight of evidence was undeniable. The law moved quickly, stripping them of their riches, their status. Justice, long overdue, had come at last. Far from the noise of the past, Adama stood at the heart of her dream. The restaurant was hers, built with her own hands, her own strength. The air carried the scent of rich spices, warm bread, slow-cooked stews. She watched as customers filled the space, laughter and life returning to the place that had once felt so empty. She had been broken, but she had rebuilt herself. The same media that had once called her a fraud now spoke of her victory. Her name spread through the land, not as a scandal, but as a symbol of hope. In the marketplace, women spoke of her resilience. Mothers told their daughters, "Be strong, like Adama." But one name still lingered in her heart. And when he appeared before her, standing in the doorway of her restaurant, her breath caught. Kweku stepped forward, his voice raw with emotion. "I was a fool," he said. "I let fear silence me, but I will not be silent anymore." He knelt before her, not as a man of wealth, but as a man who had finally seen the truth. It was never about fortune. It was never about power. It was you, Adama. Only you. Tears burned in her eyes, but she did not wipe them away. The man before her was not the one who had left. He was the one who had returned, forever. In the days that followed, Adama stood at the doorway of her restaurant, watching the children gather. She knelt, handing out warm meals, seeing in their eyes the hunger she had once known. "Eat well," she whispered. "You are never alone." The pain of the past had ended. In its place, kindness had taken root. Love had won, and the story of Adama, the girl who had once lost everything, became a tale of hope that would be told for generations to come. See you in the next video. Subscribe now for gripping stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Like and share to keep African storytelling alive. Turn on notifications. Don't miss a single tale.